Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven, and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some malicious compliance stories, and our first story of the day is by Prankish Space 4. I'm not allowed to cook food off my own judgment in a semi-busy fast food restaurant, KFC, and can only cook when you tell me to. Enjoy the coming storm of poop. So my previous job was as a cook at a local KFC, which was one of the faster ones in the area. I had been there for 3.5 years and didn't really have too many problems with management, and I was actually friends with some of them. But then one of the senior staff got promoted to a shift runner, and that's when this already average job got worse. To put it into perspective, because I had been at this job for a couple of years doing the same thing daily, I knew my crap. I knew how much chicken we would need on a given night, and I could pretty much do my chicken runs by myself, and all the other managers let me do it because they were often too busy to watch and manage chicken. This newly promoted manager didn't like that I was bypassing her in the so-called chain of command and not listening to projections which were inaccurate the majority of the time, and started getting annoyed. Sure, sometimes we had a bit of wastage, but everyone else agreed it was better to have a couple of pieces left over than to make a customer wait 30 minutes continuously. So this manager had a go at me, and our conversation went like this. The manager says, "OP, you're not allowed to cook what you want. You have to wait till I tell you what to cook and cook exactly the amount I tell you to." I say, "Even when it's super busy, you want me to interrupt you packing orders and making burgers to get you to tell me what I already know needs cooking?" "Yes, I don't care how busy. I will tell you what to cook. You have to wait for me to tell you." This happened on a Tuesday night, the busiest night at KFC where I live, due to a promotion on chicken, 9 pieces for $10.95. So, I didn't cook unless she told me to, and in a matter of 30 to 45 minutes, we were out of the original and spicy chicken with drive-thru full and many customers waiting on chicken. The manager walks out back, and me and the other cook are laughing, cleaning things and sweeping the floor. No chicken was down, the fryers were on cool, so it would take a bit to heat up and nothing was set up. The manager proceeded to yell at us, asking why there was no chicken cooking and saying customers were waiting and they were completely out. I just turned to her and said, "Well, you told me today I couldn't cook without permission, and you haven't told us to cook for the past hour." The amount of complaints and pissed off customers having a go at staff members was insane. Sure, I was behind for the remainder of my shift, and we got a lot of flack from customers that night, but she started letting us cook to judgment from then on. Plenty more stories of BS from KFC of illegal things happening. Super glad to be out of that crap hole. If you were in line at a fast food place, what's the longest amount of time you would sit there willingly waiting for the food before you just left? Personally, there was times in the past where I waited like half an hour to get my food, mostly because they seemed to have forgotten. Let me know how long it would take for you to leave in the comments down below. Our next story is by Discombobulate 1984. Involuntary participation in university psychological research studies? No thanks, I'll exploit the loophole. This is a story that took place in my final year of undergraduate studies. I was applying to several graduate schools at the time, and most required a psychology course as a prerequisite, which I hadn't yet taken. I enrolled in first-year psychology, and after the opening lecture, our class was informed that by the end of the semester, every student had to either participate in 5 psychological research studies being conducted on campus, or write a review paper of one already published psychological research study. At first, I didn't question the requirement, but as the weeks progressed, I got to thinking, hey, aren't scientific research studies supposed to be voluntary as an ethical requirement? And isn't it involuntary participation if the motive for participating is academic penalty? While I absolutely could have wrote the review paper instead of participating in the studies, something just didn't sit right with me about the principle of required participation in scientific experimentation. These researchers in the psychology department were recruiting participants by exploiting first-year students who were fearful of failing. Being in my final year, I didn't have the same timidity as my younger classmates, and here's where the exploitation of a loophole begins. Technically, even though it was an academic requirement to be a research participant in these studies, The studies themselves still had to conform to ethical rules, which meant that as a research subject, you could withdraw from participation in the study at any time for any reason without penalty. So what did I do? I signed up to be a research subject in 5 psychological studies and then proceeded to various graduate student offices and labs with my participation form in hand. I would arrive at the study, sign all the consent forms, and within 30 seconds of the actual study beginning, I would inform the researcher that I was dropping out. The researcher would still be required to sign my participation form under ethical rules. After all, no penalty for withdrawing participation. What would have been 5 hours of research participation, or at least a full day of paper writing, turned into about 15 minutes of total commitment. Some of the graduate students conducting the studies were really pissed off that I wasted their time. Others were understanding and fascinated with my stance after I explained the reasoning for my method. I explained my position to each of them, that if I believed a university wanted to recruit experimental research subjects through a course, then they should do so by incentive and not the threat of academic penalty. I would have had no problem if the professor offered an optional grade boost if students were to participate in those research studies, and I would have actually completed them. Sometimes I feel a little guilty about what I did because of how easy it was, but at the end of the day, I still stand by the principle that any scientific research subjects should be participating on a 100% voluntary basis, and that just wasn't the case then. I wonder if the university had revised their first-year psychology course requirements after my experience, and if any other students had ever discovered this loophole. People might say, oh, well, they offered an alternative, you could have just written the paper. But OP said that writing the paper would be more time-consuming and tedious than actually participating in the research study. So in the end, it's still coercion because most people won't want to do the harder thing just to avoid the research study. I definitely understand where OP's coming from. Our next story is by Shock the Link. You take my fishing spot, I'll make sure you don't catch anything. So back in high school, I was in what you might call a problem class. Just about everyone was rowdy, rude, and didn't listen to the teachers. I, on the other hand, was an introvert who liked to keep to himself. But that didn't exempt me from the collective punishment our class frequently got, so I tended to resent not only the class that got me in trouble for doing nothing, but the teachers who enacted it as well. One day, the school decides to take a new direction in punishment and started what they called enrichment activities instead of giving us extra homework or detention. They'd send us on field trips to local areas to do different activities, like cleaning up litter or volunteering at a soup kitchen. I loved this because not only was I getting less homework, but I often didn't need to be around my classmates who would take this time to goof off with their own friend groups. Eventually, our enrichment activity took us to a park outside our small city where a nature center put on a show of all the rescued animals they were allowed to bring. A big snake that was a pet but was released into the wild, a red-tailed hawk they were nursing back to health, etc. And after that, we had a choice. We could either go on a long hike or we could go fishing. I love nature, and I visit my cousin's cabin once every summer, so I chose to go fishing. I even asked beforehand if I could bring my own rod and tackle. I was told yes, especially since the school was footing the bill for the rest of the rods and the bait. So when they separated us into the 2 groups for our activities, I was kind of surprised at how small the fishing group was. It was just me and 5 others, but I figured it was for the best since less people meant less noise to scare the fish away, right? Nope. As soon as I noticed who else signed up for fishing, I realized it was a group of the loudest, most rambunctious group of teenage boys in the school, who thought they'd be the only ones to sign up so they could just hang out. But unfortunately, I did sign up and actually wanted to fish, so they were stuck fishing. And they let me know. As soon as my hook hit the water, they were loudly complaining about how boring this was and trying to get the chaperones to let them go somewhere else, but to no avail. Eventually, I got sick of them and told a chaperone I was going further down the lake to try and find a better spot. But really, I was just trying to get away from the noise. Once I found a nice spot, I pulled out my best lure and spent some time fishing, and fairly quickly caught something. I reel it in and I had caught a pretty nice-sized smallmouth bass. I ran back to the group to show everyone, mostly because the chaperones always insisted on getting pictures of these events. And the boys went from complete disinterest to excitement very quickly. Now that they saw that someone could actually catch something, they wanted to catch something too. I felt a fair amount of pride for about 5 seconds. As soon as I released the bass and went back to my spot, the whole group followed me, staying as loud as they were before. I tried to tell them that they'd scare off the fish, but they didn't listen. So I tried to go to a new spot and they followed me there too. At this point, I just wanted to fish in peace. I asked a chaperone to get them to stop following me, but she chastised me for getting them interested, then not teaching them how to fish better. Eventually, I got sick of them and hatched an idea. I swapped out my lure for a regular hook and marched over to a spot with a lot of reeds and lily pads. I told everyone that fish like to hide in the reeds from predators, true, and that the best way to catch fish during the daytime is to try and get their hooks in the middle of the reeds, not true, and they believed me. Pretty soon they were getting frustrated as their hooks got caught on reeds. One guy cast his line so far, it got caught on a branch. Another pulled so hard trying to get his one out of the reeds that he broke the crappy rod the school bought. And eventually they all gave up and went back to the first spot to hang out again, and I got to spend the rest of the trip fishing in peace. Now, I didn't get to go on any fancy field trips or whatnot, but I had a class exactly like this, where more than half the class was made up of football team people and troublemakers, and the teacher was a complete pushover, so the class was just always full of nonsense. As an introvert myself, I hated that class. I had no motivation to do anything in that class, and I actually just kind of gave up and failed that class altogether. This next story is by Kai Space Panda. Told me to drop the class if I don't like your rules? Okay, then you'll lose 5 students in your job. So when I was a freshman in college, I registered for a basic but English 102 course that doubled as a humanities credit. I thought, great, 2 birds, 1 stone, despite the rate my professor for this class being abysmal at best. A few things to note: I have ADHD and dyslexia, BS, DS, PS, and GS, so I have a hard time reading most times, but especially handwritten stuff, even my own. It's also important to note that I had an ADA allowance on file, meaning I get some permissions to allow me to take classes and function as normally as possible. These permissions included use of my tablet during class to write notes and about an hour longer on tests. Well, first day of class, the professor strolls in with the arrogance and snobitude of someone who thinks they're getting tenured this year. He starts talking, going over the syllabus, and says, "There will be no phones, laptops, or technology of any kind in my class. You will write all your notes by hand." Which isn't going to work for me, so I raise my hand and ask him if I can talk to him privately about the rule. That went over about as well as a lead balloon, and he starts getting snippy and says, "Anything you need to talk with me about can be found in the syllabus." But again, I said that I needed to talk to him and that it was pretty important. Finally, he just says to say it to the class, he doesn't have time to take out to deal with whining of any kind. Like, okay, dude. So I say that I'm dyslexic and need my tablet to do the notes and read the assignments, and that my ADA permissions are on file and emailed to all my professors before class. He says, "Yeah, I saw the email, but I don't care. You can do the work just like everyone else. You're not special even if you were in special ed." The class goes deadly quiet at that. I'm absolutely shocked at his bold and completely hilarious lack of awareness and care for his job. I'm staring at him open-mouthed and he thinks he's won. He's got this smug little face like I've just been told there's no other options, nor is there any way he'll regret his behavior. One of the girls in class finally finds her voice and calls him out in his ableism and lack of decorum, but he cuts her off saying, "If you don't like my rules, you can drop the class." So she says, "Okay," and pulled out her laptop and dropped the class right in front of him. And taking the cue from her, 3 other students and I do the same, and we leave class together at the same time. I've never met this girl before, but she then asks me if I want to go to the dean because Honestly, I'm really shaken. So I said yes, and we go straight there, telling the dean of students what happened, as well as the ADA counselor. They took the girl's statement in mind and discovered that this professor had pulled this crap for years, but nobody wanted to get involved. 6 months later, I hear that not only had the professor not gotten tenured, but he was fired and blacklisted from teaching at the collegiate level. How would you have been able to be a professor for so long that you're that close to getting tenured and have such a blatant lack of respect for anybody with any kind of disability? Although rights and processes for people with disabilities have come a long way in the last 20 years or so, it's not like there weren't any programs or permissions and whatnot for people with these kinds of disabilities over the last 20 plus years. So it's just astounding to me that this guy held his professor job for so long at the collegiate level, despite so blatantly disrespecting people with disability. It's great what happened to him. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So, until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.